Time to install our loot from the Sandsport show. We're going Razorback. What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. So today we're going to do a Razorback installation. We picked up their new dimmable belt temperature gauge and their belt blower system for the clutch housing at the Sandsport show this year. Our desert season's coming up. Our first trip is Veterans Day at Glamis. So I want that stuff installed so we're not destroying belts on our XPTS project, especially since we plan on turning up the power this year and really letting it rip. So let me kind of show you what we got from the show, and I'll walk you through the installation. All right, so here's what we got from the show. The new updated version of the Razorback gauge in the black on black with the little momentary switch. And something I'm really excited about, their blower system. This is a high-powered fan that sits right in line on the clutch breather tube. And it basically keeps the clutch housing nice and cold. This is the speed control for it. And what's really cool is it's programmable with this guy. So basically what happens is you can set through there with this little series of clicks how much it blows, what temperature it comes on. It's all automatic. So this guy will tell this guy, hey, turn on, start blowing air. And the hope is we do not have to slow down in the dunes when the belt gets hot. So this is gonna hopefully solve that. So we're gonna dig into installing it. I've got a little bracket here that should work off of our cage. And I'm gonna dig in and get this going. Okay, so for the gauge, I had bought this bracket that normally mounts up here, but because I have this bar on my custom cage, it's not gonna work. So depending on what car you have, on my Can-Am, they had a really nice one that went to the instrument cluster. So for my RZR XP Turbo, if you can use this bracket, which is their cage mount bracket or pillar mount bracket, if you have a stock cage. If you have an aftermarket cage, you're gonna need to do something different. So I have it mounted, and I need to adjust it slightly, but I've got it mounted right over here. I actually kind of bent and manipulated the bracket so I can get a nice view. And I like where it sits. It sits right there. I got the wiring run down through the steering column. I'm gonna head that back up underneath. So this is gonna be kind of a personal thing on how you do this. This is what I like. I think it works well there. I did not have to drill a lot of holes in the car, which I like. And yeah, so that's where the gauge is. Now for the sensor, this is all about the car you have. And their recommendation, because this has got a metal internal clutch housing, which I really like. My Can-Am one had a plastic and it got destroyed and I had to put a metal liner in it. So where you're gonna do this, they call it the Polaris method is like around the 3 or 4 o'clock. So if 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock. So I actually measured, and right down here, and I marked it with a Sharpie, is where the belt is completely exposed. So if I take and go straight back in here, I'm going right to belt. Any up higher, I'm going all the way to the metal of the primary. As you go up higher, you're getting a smaller and smaller amount of room to be able to read the belt. So this seemed to be the ideal spot where it's as low as possible, but I've got a complete exposed belt. So what I did from there is I measured this right here. This little edge is where the belt kind of starts. The belt is 1.5 inches, so I went over 3/4 of an inch. So this should center the sensor right in the center of the belt, which is what you want. So this again is right there where my little Sharpie mark is. That's where this hole ends up. So we're gonna install the sensor and then I can reinstall the clutch cover back on. Okay, our sensor's installed. We've got Loctite holding the jam nuts in place. Now notice how much of it is sticking out the back and how little I have in here, because there's not a lot of room between the belt and that spot. And I don't want the belt accidentally hitting this. So I've got it pretty darn flush. Now it's hard to see, but there's probably about 1 thread that's passing through the jam nut. And again, they're Loctited. So this is gonna make sure the belt's not gonna hit this and destroy a sensor, destroy a belt, make a big old mess, potentially destroy a clutch cover. So now that this guy's on, we can reinstall the clutch cover back onto the car and we can proceed with the wiring and the blower system. Okay, so a little update on wiring. Here's what I've done so far. The sensor wire, I've got it tucked around through here. It goes back in behind, I got a radio there. It drops down through and goes underneath all the way out to here. So here's where it's at. So I've got to zip tie this up, make sure it's protected. This gives me plenty of wire to get it all the way back to the back side of the housing. You know, on the Can-Am, we had it all the way up here on the front, which means you needed a couple extra less feet of wire. This, you want as much of the sensor wire as you can. So running it down the tunnel might become a little bit too tight. So this worked really well for me. Now for the other wires so far, up front, these are the wires that are going to run all the way back and going to get power. So the wires that I want to run back, I bring them out here to the front because what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop them down and they're going to come all the way out through the tunnel with all these guys and back. This way you don't see any wiring hanging down there when I'm done. So right now there's stuff hanging down there. That's all going to be cleaned up and gone, and everything's going to be clean and running through the tunnel. So for the power, I'm going to be doing a switched power. So it's going to be powered off the ignition because I don't want it running all the time. There is a fan power back here, which I need to figure out what I'm going to do about the fan power because it seems like it's on a relay and it seems like it's all set up to go off the main battery. And then you just have a switch that turns it on and off as opposed to, or not the switch, sorry, you've got the gauge that turns it on and off. So the reality is that I believe the fan is hardwired directly to. As I get closer to that, I'll update you on what I find. I can test it both ways and just see what it does. So quite the mess in here, but we're going to keep moving forward. I've got the clutch cover back on so you can see there's our sensor. So we're going to basically run our wire up across the top because we don't want it down near the axle anyway, where it's spinning. So we'll just run that back up across the top and back behind. And then we still got to cut into our tubing to add our fan. The fan is going to go, I believe, like right about here. It looks like the spot to put it. It's the most flat, simple spot for it. I know that I do need to pick up, which I thought it came with, but it didn't, unless mine was just missing it, is some hose clamps to be able to clamp this back together once I cut it and put the fan in between. And then we'll run our wiring back through for that as well. So I'm gonna keep running wiring, which is not fun to watch, but I'll show you kind of how it kind of ends up with the wires in place, and then we'll cut this tube and we'll get that fan installed. Okay, so on the XP Turbo, you basically just cut the existing tube and you put this guy in. So I think where I'm gonna go, because you can move it, you're gonna have to take some material out. Like a strip of this is going to have to go out, but it can go one way or the other. As far as looking at the diameter of this, I'm going to kind of measure this guy and make sure I have something that's going to be, because it gets narrower as it goes up. So if you're too high up, I don't think it's going to fit or be difficult to get on. Too far down, it's going to be too big. So we're going to measure the diameter of this as best as possible and the diameter of this guy and kind of get an idea of where we're going to cut. Okay, so I kind of studied the diagram of the instructions, and my plan is I kind of counted based on their picture where they say it's going to be. So I'm going to count up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I'm going to cut on 7 because then I can take material either way and it should be able to fit without a problem. All right, so I'm just going to take a really sharp X-Acto knife and start trimming. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we're going to go right here. I'm following all the way along that line. Okay, there we go. So we are officially cut, and we want to see how this works. So this is going to be pretty snug, which I think is going to be good. It's going to probably take some work to get it on, which is what you want. So on this end, I don't think we want to go any higher up, because as we go higher up, it's going to get smaller in diameter, be even more difficult to get on. So I think this might end up being right where we want it, is going to be right about here. And then on this end, we'll be able to take some material off here if we have to, just to get it to line up correctly. Okay, so I've cut another section. This came off the bottom part. We might have to take another off the top, but it's just better to cut a little bit at a time and make sure. The last thing you want to do is cut off too much and have to buy a new one of these guys. That will be no fun. Okay, just to clarify, the fan is going to be pointing that way, up to the intake. So it pulls the air in and pushes it through this back end. So when you set it up, the Razorback logo should be upright. All right, so other than my hose clamps, the back end of the car is done. We got our sensor set up. By the way, one thing I noticed too, notice I have this as a nice right angle going up. I had to rotate my sensor so it clocked it correctly. So I'd recommend going up this way. And then I've done some Velcro straps up here, so that way I can easily undo them if I go to take the clutch cover off when I'm changing a belt. And then again, on this end here, I just took the one strip of rubber out, which it's all worked. It's nice and tight and snug, not going anywhere, so that's good. Got the wiring all run together. They're kind of running around the same length. This one goes down underneath to go all the way to the front. And this guy, I just notched a little spot through the firewall. And you're gonna see, I actually put the speed control inside. It is right down here. So I've got a little more wire I can work with here, but there's a little pocket that sits in, which is just down below the seat frame. So it's nice down here out of the way. So I can put a couple screws in this and just make sure it doesn't slide around. So now we've got our wiring to do. So basically what we have to do is run our wiring. We got to run our, to the battery, the fan system. So the fan gets hardwired directly to the battery with a, we'll call it a switch wire, which is going to go into the instrument gauge that's going to tell the fan when to turn on and how much air to blow. So we're going to hardwire that. For the gauge, we're going to wire it on an ignition. So that way the gauge comes on an ignition, which then triggers the fan to come on the ignition. We've got a relay over here that's going to take care of making sure that we can hardwire, and then the relay does the job, turning the power on and off. So we got some wires to run, nothing too bad. But I want to dig in on this, try to clean it all up, and then I'll show you kind of how my wiring ended up laying out for the Razor, which will be similar in, other cars as well. I have my wiring. I ran out of loom, so I need to go get some loom because I want to run some loom on this. Because when you run the wiring up through the tunnel, there are the cooling lines for the radiator, and they get hot. So you want some loom, and you want to make sure that you are wire tying or zip tying the loom away from that. So I have those wires running up front. Power wire, well, actually, the turn on wire, ignition wire for the fan is up here. And then of course the power wire for the belt temperature gauge. So that's all hooked up on ignition. I still, again, need to run loom, clean everything up. Not gonna put the seats and everything I gotta put everything back together. But for the most part, everything's wired up. So we're gonna give it a go. So ignition up. We got light, 73 degrees, average 74. Oh. Fan at 5, so there we go. You can hear it down in there, working away. So again, we still got to get our hose clamps on here to make sure that guy's not going anywhere. But yeah, it's hooked up and it is working, which is great. All right, so I've got my wiring here in the loom. You see it's the shiny one kind of running back up underneath. And then as we get up here, our loom end's right here. The yellow kind of pops out. I ran the two together. And then it's loom all the way down through there, so it's nice and protected. So the wiring is pretty much wrapped up, except for we have that gray wire right there, which is going to be the positive and negative, or black and red, for the switch to activate the momentary switch. All right, so for our control button, our momentary, I have these little push buttons. I got them off Amazon. They're waterproof. I got them a long time ago. I had one in my Can-Am. So I've just installed it right down here. It's easy to reach down. It's not taking up any of my switch positions. And then now we're just going to run the gray wire, red to red, black to black. It's a pretty simple system. Once I have it set up, I'll show you how it works. All right, so let me show you how the controls work. So we turn the gauge on. Belts at 74. I have a setting at 20% for the fan, so it's going to run at 20% all the time, and then of course it will kick on automatically based on settings from this guy. My push button's right down here, so all you got to do is I'm going to hold the button in, and it took me to this menu. It's hard to see, but this is where you can set everything. You can set the fan temperatures, the max and minimum speeds of the fan, all the different details to kind of, program to what you like, which is super cool. So you do a lot of functionality in here, which is great. And you can just kind of scroll through. I don't know if you can see it doing it. but you can kind of go through all the different things that it has. Yeah, very programmable compared to the early versions. All right, so that pretty much wraps it up. Gauge installed, cars put back together. We got our push button and we got our hose clamps on. So this guy is all nice and secure and ready to go. All right, guys, that's gonna wrap up our install on our Razorback belt blower system and belt temperature gauge. We will be getting back to you in another video shortly, giving you kind of a review of how well it works out in the sand dunes in Glamis, and to see if that blower can keep the belt at those lower temperatures we want, so it's gonna last longer. So for everyone who's watched the videos, likes the channel, subscribes to the channel, really appreciate that. Thank you so much, and to the next video.